Just anybody? Everybody knows the rules for that. If there are any declarations of interest come to mind later on, please feel free just to flag them up as we go along. We don't have any public questions. We thought we might, but actually it hasn't transpired. So we don't have any public questions. That takes us directly then, in that case, firing through to item 5. Caroline, the floor is yours. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start on this report, I'd just like to introduce Matthew Crosby to the committee. So Matthew is online. Matthew is our interim Deputy Chief Finance Officer, which is a mouthful in itself. He has been with us just over a couple of weeks. He's taken handover from Neil and will be fulfilling what was Neil's role for us, and will be primarily responsible, certainly in the short term, for the statement of accounts for the current year. He's also managing the teams. So Matthew will be with us and will be probably sitting in this chair in next committee.
Welcome, Matthew, from afar in that case.
Hello, thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Right, if I can now go on to the report. And I'd like to deal first, I think, with looking forward to the 23-24 accounts. That's usually what this report is mainly about, looking forward. But then I think we probably need just to think about the current audit position. Noting in particular that our 22-23 accounts have not yet been audited. So, first of all, the 23-24 accounts, so the accounting period that's just coming to an end at the end of March. There are no significant changes to accounting requirements for that set of accounts. But the key issue is that the opening balances we're not expecting them to have been audited. And we can draft the accounts based on the draft 22-23 accounts. But we will need to consider guidance on their publication. I think that the key issue that needs to be considered is that the Section 151 officer will sign them as true and fair when published, but there might be questions about the opening balances. The report then talks about critical judgments, principally on the uncertainties around funding and what that might do to some of the estimates and that which are within the accounts. And then particularly on estimation uncertainty, there's a list there in the report, but I have to say they are no different really from previous years. Now thinking specifically about audit, Matthew, myself, and indeed Neil before he left us met with EY. They are working currently on their 23-24 audit plan, which they are expecting to have done by April and will come to this committee on a future date. They are, looking back at the previous years of accounts, they're waiting, and in fact we're all waiting, from a consultation on government on how the backlog accounts are going to be dealt with. We were expecting that consultation at the beginning of this week, but I've not seen any notification of it so far. What we expect to be in that consultation is backstop dates for the publication of audited accounts. The expected dates for the 22-23 accounts is the 30th of September 24. And the backstop dates for the 23-24 accounts will be the end of May 25. We're also expecting to hear about whether the National Audit Office will adapt the audit code. And if they do, that will impact the actual work the auditors do on our accounts. There is also some consideration of whether CIPFA will adapt the code of practice and may make some elements of the accounts simpler as a result. Easier to do, easier to audit. But there again, at this stage, we don't know whether that will come forward in time for the accounts. As yet, there is nothing about how opening balances are to be dealt with. When we look at 22-23, EY, our auditors, are not actually expecting to do an audit of 22-23. They expect to report on value for money, which is one of the aspects of their audit, but to disclaim an opinion on the accounts. And that will be disclaimed due to legislative direction. So that is not a qualification because there's any reason for or any problem with the accounts, but because they haven't got time to do the audit. What that means is, as I've indicated, the opening balances, which are the closing balances of the previous year, will not be audited. And EY internally are thinking about what that means. And they think it could take 2 or 3 years for the impact of that to flow through their audit work. So we can probably expect some sort of disclaimer or something similar for 2 or 3 years. They are planning to complete their audit work on 23-24 by the end of November, 6 months ahead of the backstop date. And to start their first phase of work with local authorities on the 1st of July. However, we don't know where we will come in their phasing. And I've really got one more thing just to update the committee on, which are the rent regulation issues that were identified in the HRA budget setting report. These are likely to impact on both sets of accounts. Exactly how they will impact and what EY's opinion on how they should be shown will be, we don't know yet. That's work to be done. We have briefed them on the issues and we'll work with them to determine how they are treated in the accounts. The one concern I suppose I have is this will impact on the timing of the accounts and the subsequent audit. And that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I've just got not much of a question really, but on a number of occasions in past years, then EY would always have sent someone to this committee to actually explain what's going on and explain themselves and what their actions are and how they're going to mitigate all these various problems that have gone on for quite some time now. Do we know if there's any reason why they don't do that, and can we invite them here to do that, to explain it for themselves, to save you sitting in the hot seat, which I think is, you know, would be a much better way forward. I'm surprised that I have not seen anybody from EY here for some considerable time, so I was just wondering what you thought about that.
I mean, I think in fairness to EY, they tend to come when we invite them to come. I didn't ask them to turn up this time, and I think part of the reason for that is that we really still don't know what the outcome. We haven't seen the consultation even yet. So, you're failing that. I've reported their current thoughts, but they are very much initial thoughts. They don't quite know what the rules of engagement that they will have to they will have to work under are. So apologies. We could have invited them. I didn't, because I'm not sure that there was very much more they could have said than I've said.
Okay, so at this time, you don't feel it's detrimental that they're not actually turning up, and everyone's quite happy with that. Would there be any point in inviting them at another time so the committee could have a chance to ask some questions? Would there be any point in that?
I think the next time the committee meets, or the committee has a standard sort of meeting, they will have their audit plan to produce, and that is what they are working towards. And at that stage, certainly, they will also, I would hope, know what the government intends, and what the rules and limitations that they're working to are.
So hopefully we'll see them next time.
I would think so.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions, Richard? Karen? No?
Richard first and then.
Oh, it was
Yes,
Richard.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, I've only just rejoined this committee after a few years off. I'm interested to understand the background to all this. The very long background, of course, is the abandonment of the Audit Commission. It should be still there in place, specialising in auditing local authorities. But since our government's interests, they decided to scrap it. But now, my impression is that we've got some accounts we've produced ourselves, but they haven't been audited yet. So I don't think, Caroline, I don't think you actually said that you have a set of accounts. I'm assuming that's the position, but perhaps you could confirm that. Then there's two issues. One is does it come back to the auditors not putting enough resources in yet again, which is what the position was last time I was on the committee? Or is it because not only have they not put enough resources in, but there's this issue that the government has not yet proclaimed how to treat a particular subject? So perhaps you could explain that, please. I'm sorry, I've been away for a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to give a summary of the background. And yes, we have 22-23 accounts. They were published in June last year and have been sitting there on the website as draft and unaudited since then. The background, you're quite right, probably stems from the closing of the Audit Commission and the handing over in several stages of local authority audit to private sector auditors. And that worked fine, I think, for the first few years. Probably the first contract that they held, and just as a reminder, the contracts are procured and monitored by the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited Company, which is a company of the LGA. The second contract was good for us in that it reduced our audit fees considerably. But I think there's been a number of factors which have meant that audits have not been done according to the statutory timetables in many authorities. There's a variety of reasons. Many of the audit firms have struggled to recruit and retain staff to work on public sector audits. Many authorities have struggled to recruit and retain staff in their finance departments, which means they have not produced accounts according to the timetable. Fortunately, that's not us in this case. Local authority accounts have got increasingly complicated and therefore take longer to audit. And audit firms have been held strongly to account on the quality of their audit. So they have been managing their risks and spending more and more time on their audits. And altogether, this has meant that many authorities have got several years out of date with their accounts and their audits. So this is an accumulating problem, which has been under discussion now for a number of years. The government, DLUC, Public Accounts Committee, etc., have considered this on a number of occasions and are bringing forward proposals that will be consulted on how to reset the local audit system. And it's the outcome of those discussions, potential proposals, consultation that I outlined earlier. So I hope that brings you up to speed, Richard.
Karen, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Caroline. I just wanted a brief sort of discussion around the pension judgments that are made. It seemed to me that the numbers were highly sensitive to very small changes in the numbers, and we're in a quite volatile situation at the moment. So I wondered what your comment would be on that.
I think there's two things to consider there. One is that every year we get a actuarial report on the numbers that we are to put in our accounts. So these are numbers that come from an expert, and we rely on the expertise of the actuary. And I think the second thing to realise is that the very largest figure in our accounts is usually the pension liability, which can be hundreds of millions. But it is an unusable reserve, and the movements in that reserves do not impact our income and expenditure account. They are a useful bellwether on where the pension fund itself sits, but are not, they're not important, I suppose, to the running of the council and the money the council has to spend on services, except every 3 years when the triennial valuation happens. And the result of the actuary's work at that point may mean that the rate at which we pay pension contributions may change slightly. The last triennial valuation, it changed by 0.2%. So relatively small change in the scheme of things. So I agree the numbers can switch around, but they are based on expert judgments. And those judgments are then audited as well.
Thank you very much.
Naomi, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is a question for Caroline or for all of us, but should we be saying something to the public about this in order to forestall lack of confidence? And if so, what should we be saying and who should say it?
Yeah, I think we had that discussion last year too, didn't we?
I think we did, but I was just going to come in to say that the draft accounts on our website have a statutory notice against them, which more or less says that they haven't been audited. And I can't remember the exact wordings, to be honest, but it is a brief explanation in a word or two of the situation. It's not descriptive, it's a statutory sort of notice.
I was thinking of something, well, maybe a bit more plain English, because people seem to get so very excited about local authority accounts and sure that there is something bad going on.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't look at the current notice, especially as it's been there a little while, and see if it can be reworded or anything like this. If that's advantageous, I don't know. I mean, if you had a different type of wording, then let Caroline know, and that she needs to take the lead on that. And so any ideas gratefully received, and perhaps you'd like to contact Caroline afterwards and maybe see if it's worth doing that, and you may have the right wording for that, you may not, but basically I think that's her decision really. Mike?
My question was similar to Councillor Bennett's, and it was twofold. First of all, what the reputational risk is to the authority by not having the accounts audited. But then, secondly, rather than a letter to the public, my view would be a letter to Mr. Gove, outlining our concerns about what's happening. Not necessarily expecting Mr. Gove to do anything, but that could then be published, which might then reassure the public in the way that Councillor Bennett was referring to. So I suppose there's two bits to that. I suppose the second bit is political, but the first bit is what's the risk in reputational damage, Caroline, by not having audited, or is it minimal?
I suppose my reflection would be that the accounts are out there and we get very little, in fact, no communication from residents or others about the accounts. The accounts are open for inspection. There's a statutory period of inspection, and I don't think we've had any queries on them for many years. So they're not high profile. The standard notice on the website, which I've got in front of me now, says the audit has not been completed due to a complex set of factors contributing to audit delays across the sector. And then it gives a statutory reference. I think those who know the sector know the issues and know they're very wide. I don't have visibility of any questions that our residents ask, which you may have.
It's certainly my understanding that South Cambs, who've not been audited for a number of years, if I understand it correctly, have certainly been vulnerable to questions of a political nature in relation to their accounts, and then people have put two and two together and implied that South Cambs, despite our understanding being in quite a sound position, but it implies that they're financially not in a good position. And so that's my understanding, and it's therefore, I suppose, a judgment call as to how one.
I mean, I suppose that if you wanted the message to be wider, the website where the statement of accounts is probably not the best place for that message, and it's maybe something we should confer with our communications team.
I think what I'm suggesting, if you did a discreet letter to Mr. Gove and then publish that alongside the accounts, that may perhaps do exactly what I think Councillor Bennett was concerned about.
I would say that I'm probably the least best person to give a judgment on the public impact, because I am an accountant. My views are quite different, but I do quite like Councillor Davies' idea of a letter to Mr. Gove. Maybe something Chair and Spokes could do.
I think we're going to do that. We'd copy councillors as well, because some questions will be asked there. But I will just draw your attention to 3.3, just to put it in a little bit of context here. 918 audit opinions have not been issued, spanning multiple financial years. The council is fortunate, as the audit of its 21-22 financial statement was completed on 30th November 2022. The 22-23 audit is therefore the only audit which is currently outstanding. So it's not a number of years as perhaps other. So we're in a better position than other authorities, and we could highlight that as well.
I think what I'm suggesting, Councillor McPherson, is that having been on this committee now for 5 years, and having watched what the travails and tribulations that Caroline's had to deal with in terms of the accounting process, I just think it covers us. And I think that would probably be the reason why. I don't think it requires a great deal of work, but it's just about making sure that if people do inquire, we're covered.
Richard, sorry, is that legacy hand, or did you wish to ask another question?
No, it's not a legacy.
So go
Yes,
ahead.
I wanted to follow up on. Yes, I agree with that last statement. This is not a big deal, but we might as well cover ourselves and drag Mr. Gove into it as well. Why not? I was just going to go back on the pensions issue. It's interesting. We're actually, I mean, Caroline referred to a net pension liability. In fact, we've got a net pension asset, according to the figures we've been given, of 6.8 million. When I was on the audit committee of the county pension scheme, which we're part of, with most councils were in negative positions, including, I think, ourselves for some of the time. It's extraordinary that we're in a positive position like this. But as was said earlier, there are various adjustments that could easily be made if the actuaries decided they didn't quite want to follow their previous decisions. So they do their best to put a value on the liability and the assets against those liabilities. But as in the position we're in at the moment, it's very positive. Thank you.
Just to say, it is the first year that it's ever been an asset. It is quite a small asset in comparison to the size of the liabilities, and resulted from a combination of circumstances when the work was done for last year end. It did involve an additional amount of work and consideration. We worked with our auditors on the disclosure of the asset because it is extremely unusual for that to be an asset.
Okay, everybody happy? No further questions? Patrick, now you've spoiled it now, Patrick. On you go.
We need to say thank you, and we will miss you.
See, you stole my thunder there. But it's very true. Caroline, as far as I'm concerned, you know what an expert I am on finance. It's quite stunning. My level of expertise is quite stunning. But now, with your expert help over the years, I am now assured that I can, in fact, fill up the whole of the back of a postage stamp. But you have helped me no endo, Caroline. I thank you so much for that, especially in the earlier years. Without your expert guidance and putting it into phrases and words that I could understand, I would be struggling. But thanks for that. I can now understand it all, ask the questions, and you've been an absolute delight to work with.
Thank you very much.
So the Council generally has got a lot to thank you for.
Hear, hear.
And that has been minuted. Thank you ever so much. All too quickly, I think, it doesn't really reflect Caroline's work here, but all too quickly we have to move on to item 6. And Jonathan, I believe you have the lead on this, but we also have a question from our independent person embroidered in this item. Jonathan, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening to all members of the committee. The purpose of this report is to basically communicate our feedback of work from August 2023 up to January, communicate developments in the team, talk about our forward plan of work, and sort of communicate our current opinion on the control environment. So we're on page 17 of your committee agenda report packs. And what I'll do is I'll just talk you through some of the highlights of the report, some of the key points that I want to get across. So starting on the actual cover report on page 17, in the sort of third paragraph there, we talk about the background. And this is just important. It's my usual sort of commentary and introductory text to explain the requirement for an internal audit plan, and plus talking about how the outcome of our work contributes to the annual governance statement. But the real sort of content starts in the main body of the report. So that's in Appendix A. So I'm taking you on to sort of page 21. So first of all, I'd like to talk about updates to the team and our resources. One thing that's been very good is that we've taken on board a graduate trainee as part of the National Graduate Development Programme. That's been very, very helpful and a very positive experience. I think it's important to note that we're continuing to develop the team's skills. So we're trying to keep up to date with modern techniques. So we're continuing to invest time learning about data analytics and even areas like AI. Overall, I think we've been making reasonable progress with our audits, and we've listed those in the progress against plan section later on in the report. What I'll say at this point is that we've identified 5 new reviews as priority work around housing safety compliance. I'll talk about those just in a moment. So as we go into the reports, as we go to page 25, this is where we start to table and list our reports completed since we last reported to the committee. We have 9 reviews there with detail about the assurance levels. Overall, it's generally quite positive. Then moving further on to the report as we get to page 31, this is about where we look forward. So this is some of the forward plan work we've got coming up. And I mentioned just a moment ago the 5 reviews of housing revenue account safety. So this is something where we've completed assurance work in this area before, and we've noticed sort of improvements during our follow-up process. But I think the council recognises there's still further opportunity for improvements, and that was reported via the Housing Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks ago. So we're helping look at that. We're going to be providing independent assurance that good progress is in place. And that's going to be helpful timing-wise as we have to start reporting to the regulator for social housing. Moving on to other sort of assurance and consultancy work, counter fraud. It's worth noting that we participate in the National Fraud Initiative, which is where we upload data sets from council systems and it gets matched nationally to help identify cases of fraud and error. And we uploaded the most recent data sets to timescale, which was very good. And one thing I'm keen to highlight is global internal audit standards. So in our profession, we have to follow public sector internal audit standards currently, but there have just been issued new global standards. So we're looking at those at the moment, trying to understand how they will impact us and making sure that we're staying up to date with the latest professional guidance and good practice. So the latest standard was only just published in January, so it's something we're looking at the moment, and guidance is still being published on that. So they are still sort of being developed. So there are a couple of different approaches available to actually demonstrating our compliance with them. So that's another thing we're trying to work out what's the best route for us and the best route for the council going forward. So we'll hopefully get a better idea of that over the coming months. So yeah, that's something worth being aware of. It's probably boring for a lot of people, but extremely interesting for us and our team. The other thing I'd like to highlight, which is important, is governance. We're continuing to focus our work on the local code of governance. And we've also, in the back office, we've been developing a system to support the management of all the information and documentation that goes into that. So that's going to help us have better quality assurance that we're keeping it up to date. And that will be important when we come to assess our compliance with it, which feeds into the annual governance statements, which gets reported with a statement of accounts later in the year. We've also got an update on risk management. We've got a much more detailed item coming up next on the agenda, so I won't talk too much about that here, but it's worth noting we've had some very good progress with that. So that takes us to the end of the report. So as conclusion, I think we're making good progress at delivering the plan. Thanks to my team, of course, for helping with that. I'm happy to take any comments or questions you've got.
Thank you, Jonathan. Richard, you still got a hand up there? Is that for this one?
Sorry, no, that is a legacy.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Oh, Karen, sorry. I missed you, Karen, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. I was interested in the new areas of audit, the HRA ones, and I just wondered how you chose those categories: safety, asbestos, fire, electrical, etc. But to me, one of the items that is missing there is mold. So I wondered how you'd chosen those ones that you've got there.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, what we've looked at and we've developed as part of our, sounds rather grand, our audit universe. That's our list of all the audits we could potentially do. We've got a whole suite of housing safety ones, and it doesn't include, as you say, damp and mold. It also includes other areas such as water and lift safety. And these are sort of aligned to the sort of standards that are set out through the housing regulator. We can't do them all at once. We've only got so much resource, so it's very much about prioritising what we thought are the most important ones to provide assurance on. So what we did is we had initial meetings with the managers and directors of that service to prioritise what are the most important ones to do now. And that's what we've got there in that list. And once those are concluded, we'll be moving on to those other areas such as damp and mould next.
Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Jonathan, one of the problems with damp, condensation and mould is that Mr Gove hasn't set our standards yet. So if you did that now, presumably you would have to do that again when he finally gets round to putting something behind the bluster. So while I don't think anything is more important than condensation, damp and mould, I do understand why you're not doing it now, and I do support that decision. And that actually leads neatly into my next question, which is, were there any other things that you would have wanted to do which didn't make the cut? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, sure. So I think we're okay. There's nothing critical that we're dropping as a result of this. I mean, you can see from the list we have actually got other reports, some of which were in progress, and we're prioritising the HRA stuff. So yeah, I don't have any immediate concerns about that. What will happen when we reprioritise our plan? Just what happens that things get sort of postponed and delayed to later on in the year. But there's nothing specific areas of concern.
And I also wanted to say a word of thanks for your assistance to the combined authority. I know that we've discussed before whether being in special measures, I know it's not quite special measures, might restrict the combined authority's ability to seek a franchising operation. And well, whatever the answer to that question, I think any help that you can give them in terms of procedures is something that we'll all benefit from.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we do seek out to work out with colleagues in similar roles throughout the county and share knowledge with each other. And we did have some productive meetings with them, looking at different aspects of governance, risk and control. And yeah, very productive meetings. I agree.
Councillor Davey.
I'd like to return to Councillor Young's point, if I'm honest. It would be helpful. I understand what Councillor Bennett said, but I think there is an issue about damp and mould. So it'd be helpful to understand the timescales involved, Jonathan. And I don't see any problem in actually putting, as it's about future work, I don't understand why it's not there if we plan to do it, if that makes any kind of sense. So again, and therefore, again, I do realise it's all about priorities. So is that not a priority over some of the other things that we might be doing? And that is back to this eternal question, I suppose, Jonathan. So if you could address those issues, I'd be really grateful.
Thank you. Yes. So timing wise, I think it would be later in the year, so probably not too far away. But I say these were the ones that we agreed would be the best sort of focus immediately. I think why we don't put it in this current report is for the simple reason is that the pace of change can be so quick. We're trying to keep it limited to a 6-month sort of forward plan at the moment. That was good practice that was sort of recognised as we went in the pandemic. And it's continued because audit plans are becoming so flexible and we need to be agile and respond to it. So there's always the hazard that we put things in beyond that 6-month period and then they're not there because other things change. So it's just really trying to convey to the committee sort of like a more targeted short-term piece of work. But as I say, we are likely to touch on the damp and mould and condensation area quite shortly afterwards.
And the timescale for the 5 reviews that are there, Jonathan, because unless I've missed it, I can't. So presumably, for what your answer is, that it will be within the next 6 months.
Oh yeah. For the five we've got highlighted there in the plan, we've already kicked those off. They're already in progress. We've agreed the scopes and briefs with the directors and senior managers. We've also had a kick-off meeting with all the teams. So yeah, our focus on that should be hopefully quite quick, within the next couple of months, I would hope.
One final point. I think you'll find there's a lot, as you can probably tell, a lot of member interest in this. So when those reports can be shared, I think there'll be considerable interest, certainly amongst the people within this room, as to what you find. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, the only questions I have, which I already had noted down here before the meeting, have already now been asked, so I won't ask them again, except just to clarify, I didn't know about the 6 months either because it wasn't in the report, but just to keep me straight, Jonathan, does that mean that the damp and mould issue will be added to the priorities in 6 months? So is that an actual hard timescale for that?
Yeah, I think you'll see it in the next report that comes to the committee.
If any, sorry to butt in again, if any of these five that have been identified are completed before the end of that 6 months, can we slide the damp and mould in before that?
Yeah, we can certainly consider that. Absolutely. Yeah, our plan's designed to be flexible. And we've only got, do bear in mind, we've got sort of like limited resource within the team, but if the opportunity arises, we can certainly consider that.
That would be really useful, because then if we end up in that sort of situation, then if you'd be kind enough just to let me know, then I can let other members of the committee know what's happened there, and that it in actual fact has been prioritised before the 6 months is up. So that would be very useful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've made a note of that, and of course it would depend upon the availability of the team that's being reviewed, of course, as well. But yeah, I've made a note of that to see if we can bring that forward.
Well done, Jonathan. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for that. That is really only recommended that the committee note the internal audit update report, and we've done that. So that was the only recommendation on page 17. Dear members, that takes us to item 7 on page 41. Stephanie online will be leading on this. Recommendations are on page 42 at 2.1. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to everybody. In introducing this report, this risk management strategy and framework, I think it would be helpful just to provide a little bit of context to the document. Risk management forms part of the Council's governance and assurance framework, and assurance over risk management will be a key element underpinning the annual governance statement, which is obviously brought to yourselves. The risk management strategy and framework is not required to be reported to or approved by Civic Affairs. However, we recognise that it is good practice in bringing it to you for notice, basically. Our constitution places risk management reporting by the executive. Therefore, to avoid a duplication of monitoring and scrutiny, our focus is solely on the risk management processes. It is reasonable to share a copy of the strategic risk register to provide assurance that key risks are being managed, and feedback from yourselves is always welcome. However, it's not the role of the committee to update the actual register. As I said, it would provide duplication beyond the terms of reference of the committee, as it doesn't actually refer to risk. Our next risk management update with the leadership team is in early March, when we'll be using the framework to review the strategic risk register, and for that to be then taken by the leadership team to the executive to engage with them on the risk register. Once that latest revision has been completed, we can look at sharing the strategic risk register with yourselves. A number of changes in respect of risk management have taken place since we last presented the strategy and framework to you in September 2021. Those activities include development of the risk management intranet pages, implementation of regular risk management reporting to both the corporate management and the leadership team, introduction of quarterly risk management performance measures, and migration of over 200 risks to a new risk management system, and delivery of training to in excess of 70 system users. As a result of all those changes, amongst others, we we acknowledged that we needed to reflect those changes in the strategy and framework, and as a result, we've made a number of changes, key changes to the strategy, which is why we sort of bring it to you today.
We've lost the sound there, Stephanie.
Sorry, just leant on my space button. I do apologise. What I was trying to say was the changes that we've made to the document include updates to the terminology to reflect the new management structure that's been implemented during the last year. We've also enhanced the risk appetite statement that now includes proposals to adopt risk appetite levels for each of the risk categories that we have. And also enhancing the processes for risk escalation, either between, we do have various systems for recording. We've got the main risk register, but we do acknowledge there are a couple of other systems within the organisation where we hold risks to, such as the project management system and the health and safety system. So we're trying to sort of identify how we escalate those between those systems. We're also proposing to introduce multiple category risk scoring, which will improve this risk scoring basically within the system. But we also don't currently capture inherent risk scores. We only have the current risk scores. So we're hoping to undertake an exercise shortly to capture inherent risk so we can see how the controls are impacting on those risk scores. The other things we've changed, we've updated roles and responsibilities. So hopefully they're clear as to who does what and how the visibility of risks are within the organisation. And finally, we also have added in more information about partnership and cross-cutting risks. We acknowledge that we are doing more with partners, and we need to obviously reflect those risks within the strategy. We did have one question from the independent person, and I hopefully have addressed that question within my introduction. And that was basically about sort of having sight of the strategic risk register, but I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Okay, I can't see any questions in the room just yet, but somebody might think of something. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Bennett, then Councillor Davey, and then I will say what I was going to say.
Right, I think Councillor Young has a question on this. And I was going to let her have first go on it.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. Councillor Long, it is all yours by popular demand.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to wait till called. We had an opposition briefing on this, and I understand, and also Stephanie, you outlined it in your kind of introduction, that this committee only looks at the sort of the process of managing risk, which is fair enough. And I think the report kind of sets it out quite well, and your intentions to look at the inherent risk as well. I think it's quite important to understand that as well. All sounds very good. My only comment would be is that there doesn't seem to be any opportunity for opposition scrutiny, or any scrutiny, not necessarily the opposition, of the risk register in the way we do things. So I know we're looking at changing the governance, and I would just like to say that I hope this is something that's kind of taken into account. I think ideally maybe this should go to the scrutiny committees relevant to each area, but I believe that's not happening, and I think that's a weakness in the scrutiny system that we have at the moment. That's what I've got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, we can certainly take that on board.
I've got Councillors Bennett, Davey and Robertson in that order. Stephanie, do you wish to hear all the questions, or would you like to answer them one at a time?
I can do them one at a time. That's perfectly fine, Chair.
Yep, that's all received. So, Councillor Bennett, all yours.
Mine was exactly the same as Karen, so they're less well expressed, which is why I asked if she could go first.
I said it was popular demand. Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much for your presentation and going through the process. My question was about timing. which is, I think, odd enough linked to Councillor Bennett and Councillor Young. How often would the risk register, I might have missed it, so forgive me, how often does the risk register, or should the risk register, go to the leadership team? And would it not be worthwhile it going to the leadership team stroke executive at the same time, so that therefore there could be analysis and scrutiny, oddly enough, by the executive councillors, let alone the opposition councillors? And I do accept both Councillor Young and Bennett's point of view is where this then should go if there was an issue, or even if there wasn't an issue, how did the opposition groups fit in? Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, no, it's a very good question. We have quarterly updates with the leadership team where we discuss the risk register, the strategic risk register, and obviously they meet with the exec. We're not involved in that, but obviously the responsibility is with the leadership team to take that to the exec. So, I mean, I can definitely take your comment on and drive that forward.
That would be very helpful, because I think if it went into the process, that would ensure that the members somewhere would get to see what the risk register was, because at the moment that does appear to be a gap. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about a specific area, that is partners, which is referred to on page 61 and 62. Now, this presumably includes people like Cambridge Investment Partnership, with whom we're in a joint venture. Now, perhaps I should have asked Jonathan when we were dealing with internal audit, how much work do we do, have we the right to do overseeing the work of the KIP partnership? Because the figures involved are extremely high. And obviously there's a level of risk which we have to recognise.
Did you want to respond to that, Jonathan, or?
So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, it's material amounts there. I mean, what we have in terms of the sort of risk management framework is lots of different areas of risk. And I think we do factor that in the report, talk about different areas, and each different area will have its best way of managing risk. What we're trying to really pick up on as part of this framework is how all these things can connect and feed into each other. And that would include partnership risks. So the people who are stakeholders from the council, who are involved with those partnerships, they've obviously got the opportunity to feed that back into our central risk management framework and process. Steph, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's probably a fair point. I mean, I'm just not sure whether Councillor Robertson's questions were about sort of whether we've actually audited those areas. Have insight into that.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it an area you've covered to any extent?
It's not something that we've covered recently, in short, but you know, it would be within our sort of scope and purview to do. Yeah.
Good. Anyway, certainly in the risk management. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
I think there's an irony with this. I looked at Caroline and Rich. My memory is at every board meeting we get a risk assessment from KIP, which is quite interesting. So the actual reality is they're quite strong at it, but therefore it's then how that's fed into the council as a whole. And obviously that only relates to KIP because there are other partnerships that we have in addition. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Any other comments, questions? Okay, recommendations are on page 42 at 2.1. Civic Affairs Committee is asked to note, and we have on the other items, and comment on the revised risk management. We've commented. Second part is and agree that officers can continue to make subsequent minor updates and amendments. Do we agree? Everybody in favour of that? Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for that. I will, before I sign off on this item, on page 43, I will bring to members' attention, 1, 2, 3, fourth box down. It says, we were a finalist in the 2023 Alarm Rising Star category, which recognises the improvements made in the council. This was a significant achievement as we were competing against much larger public sector organisations. So very well done. I thought it was worth highlighting that. I always like to end on a really good note. B flat's a good note. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to item 8 on page 87. Lindsay, it's all yours. So I'm just looking for the recommendations, page 88, I believe. Yeah, page 88, section 2. There are quite a few recommendations there, A to H. The floor is yours.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. For those of you that I've not had the opportunity to meet yet, my name's Lindsay Fulcher. I'm the Head of People. Been with the Council for about 5 months now, so thank you. I'm primarily here to present to you the Pay Policy Statement, which is an annual paper that comes to you to satisfy our requirements under the Local Government Transparency Code. But in preparing this, I have had a look through some of our policies and our procedures and our pay terms and proposing some changes today that I've incorporated into the Pay Policy Statement that I would like your consideration, please. And these are done to, I feel, to positively benefit our workforce, whilst also trying to increase our attractiveness as an employer, especially in an ever competitive employment market. There is lots of background in the report. I will assume that you've had the opportunity to read through this, but if I may just take the opportunity to run through the decisions and the recommendations that I've outlined. And as you say, there are a few there, so I'll go through them in one and then take any questions if that's okay. The first thing I have there is a recommendation for Director and Assistant Director roles to be evaluated using the Hay methodology. At the moment, there is a matching process that takes place to look at evaluating those. I feel that if we move to evaluate them using Hay, which we currently use for other senior roles in the organisation, it will place us in a better position to defend any equal pay claims at this level and help us with our pay transparency. The second thing I have is the introduction of an additional responsibility allowance, and this will ensure that our staff are adequately and transparently recompensed when they take on additional responsibilities. We do currently pay people extra money if they take on additional responsibilities, but this gets masked within various different ways in terms of overtime or honorarium payments, and I'd like to have something really transparent and clear, so it'll be an additional pay element. Item number C is the increase of the Cambridge weighting. As you're aware, we apply Cambridge weighting to our roles. It's currently £11 an hour, but we pay the real living wage, which is £12 an hour at the moment. So I propose that from April, we increase the Cambridge weighting to £12.50, which gives us that slight edge and takes us above the real living wage rate of £12 per hour. Item D is the a change approach to how we recruit and pay our apprentices. At the moment, they're not subject to real living wage rates. They are employed on rates which reflect to some extent national apprenticeship rates, which many organisations exceed, to be honest, which places us in a position where we're not always competitive. I would like to suggest that we include them in the real living wage considerations, and they're paid a minimum of £12.50, including Cambridge weighting per hour. And I would also like to propose that we bring them onto permanent contracts. At the moment, the default is apprentices are brought on fixed-term contracts, and at the end of their apprenticeship, they apply for roles with us. Can cause us to lose some people, and I think bringing them on permanent contracts would be a good move and make us much more attractive in the apprenticeship market. I would, in item number E, as you can see, I would like to recommend that we don't seek Investors in People accreditation this coming year. There is a cost associated with that, which I've outlined in the report, but I think the biggest consideration for me is that we're taking the council on a journey in terms of transformation. We would like to spend our time looking for charters or accreditations that are much more relevant to the journey we're on, and also to use some of the money to carry out an all-employee survey, which we can then tailor to our aspirations as opposed to the IIP standards. Getting towards the end, we have a change in delegation that's come through from the Employment Senior Officer Employment Panel. I would appreciate your consideration of the wording in 6.3 and whether or not you would endorse and recommend the changes to Constitution to go to full council as outlined there. And then finally, if you are in agreement in terms of the recommendations that I have outlined, I would appreciate your endorsement and recommendation of the pay policy statement that's attached in Appendix 1 to full council. I think that was it from me. Thank you.
Well done, that was impressive. Questions for the officer, anybody? Naomi?
I want to say I like the change to apprenticeship terms. It's really important that we put the most attractive package forward to people at the start of their career journey. The idea of people having cradle to grave employment may be fading, but hopefully we can hang on to some good people. And my other query is about our lowest paid staff. My recollection is that we only have about 30 people on band 1. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I believe it's that in that region.
And the reason I wanted to ask about that is I'm trying to think of a way to put this doesn't land my day job clients in it. But I have rumblings from my day job clients, they can't recruit at that level or anything like that level in Cambridge. My recollection is the band 1 people are mainly people doing things like stewarding at the Corn Exchange and other things rather than necessarily full-time roles. But are we noting any difficulty in recruiting and retaining at our current levels?
Yes, well, to be honest, I think we're experiencing challenges across all grades, to be honest with you. Perhaps less so at the lower bands, and the reason being is we do have the Cambridge rating and the real living wage. That puts us in a slightly more competitive position than some of the other employers out there. But the other thing, as you rightly note, is a lot of our staff, we don't have huge amounts of staff on band 1, but the vast majority of them, or a high proportion of them certainly, are on 0-hour relief contracts, and they're brought in on a no obligation basis. So if there's an event that goes on and we need them, we call them in, but they don't have to work. So there's that additional flexibility for those. So I think it's a challenge across all of the pay grades, but I don't think I would say that it's more so at the lower grade.
Okay. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. I have three questions areas. Cambridge weighting. I see it was £11. It's proposes to put it up to £12.50, which would be 50p above the real living wage. Was the £11 rate above the real living wage at that point as well? Do you know?
It was at the time it was set, and then the real living wage increase came into effect from November, which therefore took us.
Yes. It's always out of phase. We're out of phase with it, or it's out of phase with us. Yes. But so what was the gap differential before then? If it's going to be 50p now.
That's a very good point. I can just check that one for you. I'm not sure of that at the moment, to be honest.
Okay. Now the investors in people accreditation, I entirely agree that if we don't need to keep paying other people for something that's not specifically what we want. But I think the recommendation E should have in it included that we would develop our own in-house staff survey. So could that be added to recommendation E?
Yeah.
It's not in there at the moment.
Yeah.
And then finally, you mentioned taking on apprenticeships on a permanent basis, not a fixed term contract. But I can't see that's not in the recommendations. And I don't actually agree with it either, because I feel that we take people on as apprenticeships, they do well or they do not do well, at the end of which we decide whether we want them or not. That seems a more rational approach to it. But if it's not in the recommendations, then I would suggest it's not going to be adopted.
Apologies if that's not in there. It was one of the considerations in the pay policy. So if you're happy to consider it this evening, I would appreciate it. And what I can say is that the rationale for coming forward with that as a proposal is that at the end of the apprenticeship, if we are requiring people to apply for a role with us, they're having to go through the motion of updating their CV or filling in application forms, the chances are at that stage, if they're having to do that for us, they will be looking elsewhere and also looking at other employers. Whereas if we take that step away, they still have the opportunity to leave. We're not tying them in to anything in terms of a payback with the apprenticeship, but it does just remove that hurdle and hopefully discourages people from leaving us at that stage.
Well, I think I'll ask my colleagues sort of their views. My view is if you end up with somebody you don't want to give them a permanent contract. See what they think.
I think my question there would be to Lindsay, if just to pick up where Councillor Robertson's coming from there, if indeed they got to, I like the concept of it first of all, but if it does transpire that we do have an apprentice with a permanent contract who actually isn't meeting the requirements of that contract, I guess it would be like any other employer who wasn't meeting their obligations, and that process would go through HR and be dealt with in very much the same way. So we wouldn't actually be employing somebody who wasn't any use to us.
No, that is correct. There are some additional requirements when somebody is actively in their apprenticeship, and that's to safeguard them, to make sure that we acknowledge it's an apprenticeship and they have learning and developmental support in place. However, once they become an employee and during the term of that apprenticeship, there is ways for us to manage their performance and also look to exit them should they continually not meet standards.
Councillor Davey.
To answer Councillor Robertson's challenge, I also think that the process as outlined in the proposal is the right way round. I think the positives outweigh the negatives in that you're actually indicating an inducement and a commitment to apprenticeships. And like Lindsay said, if there's a problem with an apprentice, I hope the actual disciplinary process would take place way before the end. And I think that therefore we'd be looking at ensuring that we had good employees. Where I do agree with Councillor Robertson, is with regards to the IIP. I think I also think, like Councillor Robertson, that there seems to be a limit to continuing. But I also think we need to ensure that the appropriate work that IIP enabled to happen is included in the future. And I think it goes beyond staff surveys. And so I think there needs to be some way of addressing how IIP or the principles behind IIP can be picked up. So I would support Councillor Robertson on that one, although not the apprenticeships. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, Councillor Young, I keep missing you, don't I? Sorry.
I'm in a funny place. Just very quickly, I just wondered how many apprentices we had.
I believe it's in the region of 11 at the moment active.
Okay. Well, we should be able to manage those. Yeah.
Okay, if we could just.
There's 21 in paragraph 336, but they may not all be fulfilled, I suppose.
Sorry, my apologies. I meant the 11. They're the people that at the moment are on the entry level that would benefit from the differences in the Cambridge rating. So I apologise for that.
Okay, that's received. If we can just have a look at the recommendations there for a second, so we're all clear what we're talking about here. On the apprenticeship there, let me see now. At D, we would, quite right, Richard's quite right there. We need to either add or not add, depending on what the committee feel, that we should be offering permanent contracts to apprenticeships at their startup, because right enough, that is not on here at the moment. So that would need to be added as an amendment. So we'll just take that one first. So if we could just have a show of hands, please, for those members, from those members who agree that we should add to section D that apprentices should be offered a full-time contract. So if we could just have a show of hands for that. 1, 2.
I'm afraid I'm not allowed to vote.
Oh no, of course not. No, of course not. You're online. What a shame. Okay. So okay, it's unanimous in the room in that case then. So we can add that. Section E, the investors in people. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not exactly clear what we're asking for. Richard was asking for an amendment there, as was Councillor Davey. Can you just run what you would like the amendment to be, and then we'll vote on it?
I think Councillor Davey has a better view of it, widening it from just the staff survey, taking on the attributes of the
Well, it's more an
IIP.
addition rather than an amendment, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm sort of looking to Lindsay as a way of how we might do this, but it's whilst it's about recommendation that investor people accreditation is not renewed, whilst taking steps, whilst the authority would take steps to ensure that the principles of IIP were incorporated into the day-to-day work of the authority. As that sounds.
That's perfect. That makes sense. Thank you.
I can't repeat it now, Lindsay, because I've completely forgotten what I just said. But you,
yeah, that's perfect.
So what we're looking for there, just to be clear, people, is that we agree that the Investors in People accreditation is not renewed. I mean, I've done a little bit of background on that as well, and I don't think it really benefits us very much or very many. It's becoming quite outdated now, Lindsay, isn't it?
It is, and I've had a look at some of the other local councils. We are the only one in the area at the moment that's still accredited.
And the costs associated with it. So we're all okay on that. Are we all agreed on that first half? Yep. You guys in the room here, everybody agree with that? So what we need to add onto there is some credible form of wording from Lindsay, where although we have made that, or will make that decision in a moment, that the principles of the investors in people will continue to be upheld by the council within their HR strategy or something like that. Is everybody okay with that type of wording? Are there any other amendments from A to H in that case? I think it was just those two, wasn't it? Before you go, Naomi? Yes, I do approve. Okay. So all those in favour of those recommendations with those two amendments attached? And Naomi's just said verbally she does. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. And welcome, Lindsay. See, that wasn't too painful, was it?
No, that's lovely. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to agenda item 9 on page 101. The recommendations are at section 2 on 101 and just over the page at 102. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I don't need to extend the length of this meeting any longer than necessary. This is mainly a tidying up of the existing flag protocol, formalising the fact that councillors had asked for certain other flags to be flown as part of the annual kind of cycle of our commemorations. So I'm happy to take any further questions and expand on why we have one or what it's all about and what else we do. But if in the interest of brevity, I'll stop talking there and be able to question.
Are there any questions for Andrew? I personally don't have any. Anybody else? Everybody happy to accept the recommendations? Naomi is not here, so we have to just take the vote from those of us who are. So everybody read the recommendations and we're happy with those? All those in favour of those recommendations, please show. Thank you so much. And that, in fact, just takes us to item 10, which is really to note the, I'll get to the right page in a moment, and that is to note officers' urgent decisions, and that goes from page 107 right to the end at 112, so to item 10, 10A, 10B and 10C. Would you like to go through each of those A, B and C, or are you happy to take them collectively?
Happy to take them collectively, Chair.
Thank you so much. Members in the room happy to do that? Thank you so much. So it was just to note them anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute delight. That takes us to the end of the business today. 1 hour, 14 minutes, not bad. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Richard, put the kettle on. We'll be round in a minute.
I hope